as well as regional accounting firm experience. She has practiced as a sole practitioner in estate planning since 1984. And then Melvin Oswald with NAS Insurance Services. Melvin joined NAS in 2002 and specializes in healthcare, cyber liability, employment practice, directors, and officers coverage. Melvin currently supports NAS's reinsurance program, working with over 75 program partners throughout the U.S.
So thank you guys for coming. Melvin and I are going to kind of switch off and on. When Chris asked me to speak well over a year ago, we hadn't even really conceived of what the conference was going to be. There was just a germ of an idea. And then the question came up, can you do coverage? Well, I'm a CPA and an attorney. I don't do coverage. Actually, agents and underwriters have to be insured. Not insured, excuse me, certified. They have to be licensed. And so we invited Melvin here, and Melvin provides for CAMICO. CAMICO is an insurance company in Northern California, and we're in 45 states. We insure CPAs all over the country. But I advise CPAs on their small businesses and educate them so that they can also educate their small businesses that they're representing. So cyber has become a very big issue, and we formed a partnership with NAS to be able to embed their cyber security policy within our professional liability policy. And they have grown. We had a conversation last night. They grew from, what was the original number of employees?
About 30.
About 30 to about 200, and they're in 4 different locations throughout the U.S. And they have a much larger, and she'll be able to address your policy and coverage types of issues. So being the good tax attorney CPA that I am, what's certain in life? We know that death is certain, taxes are certain, and now we know security breaches are certain, right? So we do have the agenda. Let's see, you want to put that there, right? Let's see, yeah. So this is kind of what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the cyber landscape. I am going to have some repetitive issues from Bob and from agents on. I am going to be talking about incident response plan and incident response team a little bit differently from a risk management perspective. This is applicable, even though I talk to CPAs, it's applicable across the board for all small businesses and medium-sized businesses. So whatever I talk about today, you can take it home. Even though these examples we're talking about probably are going to be mostly CPAs, it's still applicable to you. Trust me, you can just change the name of the business. And so these are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. Hopefully we'll have enough time for questions afterwards. Coverage claims, trends. We'll both talk about that. I'll do the risk management piece, and Melvin will do the cyber claims and the rest of the coverage issues. So you're on.
Thank you. I'll just speak
Okay.
Hello, everyone. You notice our names are Randy and Melvin. We were trying to be consistent with the male panels today. But just in case you're curious, my name really is Melvin. I'm female. My father really wanted a boy, so he was definitely disappointed when I was born. I have been with NAS for 14 years now. I started underwriting employment practices liability coverage, directors and officers, tenant discrimination, all kinds of different billing E&O, which is called med defense coverage, and definitely cyber security is the top coverage that we're looking at right now. So let's start with the cyber landscape. So this is from the ITRC, which is the Identity Theft Resource Center, and they basically showed which industries are being hit by data breaches. So the bottom 2 are banking and financial industries at 5%, government or military at 7%. This looks surprising because you would think they would be heavily targeted, and they are heavily targeted. However, because they're very highly regulated, they have very sophisticated cybersecurities. Now, the top 2 industries that's hit with data breaches are medical healthcare at 34% and businesses at 45%. And the businesses includes insurance companies, retail business, accountants, you name it. And the reason why they're hit is because of the fact that a lot of them are smaller companies. And obviously because of that, they have a lot of information as well, like accountants. They have very sensitive information, such as social security numbers or financial information, bank account numbers, they need to secure. And that's why they're a huge target for cyber criminals. I just want to do a quick census because we're talking about statistics here. Who of you have been affected by a cyber breach? Okay, Anthem, there's Target as well. I've been hit, I've received the notifications from Target. My husband, who was covered with Anthem for a few years, was hit, received a notification. And my son, who's only 10 years old, was affected. So now the whole family received junk mail. Now, you hear on the news about large companies, Anthem, Target, Sony, that's being hit with cyber crimes or cyber breaches almost on a daily basis in the news. However, small businesses are definitely a target for cyber criminals. And the reason is because, unlike large companies, small businesses can't afford the IT department or IT person to help protect their systems and make sure that their systems are up to date. So they're definitely vulnerable as far as cyber breaches are concerned. So the statistics shows this, and it's interesting to see the past statistics when it matches, which is great that we have some consistency here. Small businesses, about 55% of small businesses have been attacked in the past 12 months. And 60% of those small businesses have closed their business within 6 months of the cyber attack because it can be very costly, such like the cybercrime, breaches that we're seeing. And then 48% of the breaches are due to malicious intent. An example is the WannaCry, which you've seen also, and it's growing drastically. Have you heard of the WannaCry before today? Okay. So you're familiar with it. They lock your files, encrypt it, and in order for you to decrypt the files, they ask for a ransom. For the WannaCry, they ask for $300 to be paid within 3 days, and if they don't receive the payment within 3 days, they will double that ransom, and then if they don't receive the ransom within 7 days, your files are lost forever. What's interesting is anyone that's been hit with a WannaCry, they receive very detailed instructions. What was stolen, how it was done, and how to fix it. So they give you a very detailed of, what is a Bitcoin? They give you a link and educate you what a Bitcoin is. And they also give you instructions on how to purchase Bitcoins. And so there's been a lot of jokes about the WannaCry. And it's interesting how these, the names of these cyber attacks are coming. WannaCry is very interesting. So obviously it created a lot of jokes on the internet, especially in the IT world. My personal favorite was #WannaCry. The ransomware criminals provide better services than most companies. So it's very interesting to see these types of crimes. Now, the ITRC Identity Theft Resource Center also provided statistics on the causes of breaches. The first one here is the hacking or phishing attacks, which is a huge gap from the second cause of a breach. So this is 55% of the causes of breach. As you can see from the FBI's presentation, you can understand why. The next on the list is accidental internet or email exposures at 9.2%, employee errors or negligence, which is 8.7%. This includes emailing the wrong information to the wrong patients or customers that has personal identifiable information. There's insider theft, which is at 7%. There's third-party theft at 6.4%, and there's also physical theft at 6.3%. Now, I can throw all kinds of statistics to you, on pages and pages of statistics, and I love looking at statistics. Yes, I was a math major, and that's why I look at numbers all the time. But the biggest takeaway as far as cyber criminals or cyber threats is concerned is the fact that it's growing drastically. One of the things that these slides don't show you is that there was a 40% increase in cyber breaches from 2015 to 2016. So it's definitely a top concern for consumers, individuals, as well as the government. In fact, if you visit the FBI website, they'll list their priorities that they're monitoring. The first one is terrorism, the second one is counterintelligence, and third one is cybercrime. And from hearing from you, it's possible that cybercrime could become number one or number two of their top concerns. Now, let's talk, there's ways to proactively secure your systems, risk management and so forth. But there's also a reactive way to do it, which is, insurance companies have definitely come up with very broad cyber coverages. So we're going to talk about cyber, policies. And there's definitely been an increase of need for cybersecurity because just our office alone, we see over 1,000 claims on an annual basis. And that's a lot of claims. So most insurance policies provide coverage for first-party as well as third-party coverage. And the first-party coverage basically provides coverage for your expenses due to a cyber breach. So the first one on the list here is the privacy breach response costs, notification expenses, breach support, and credit monitoring expenses. It's a mouthful.
So Melvin, I want to insert
Sure.
something here. As the attorney Bob had said earlier, there are notification differences among all the states that have notification requirements, and each one of them costs you money. We have one of our first ones happened in Texas. Our partner had his laptop stolen, and by the way, this was a partner probably around my age, not a very good memory, and had taken a sticky and written his password in his ID and stuck it on the back of his computer. And so within that, he was doing audits for pension plans. So you can imagine the data that was on his computer. Thousands, and the company, two of the companies it represented, if I could tell you the names, you'd know them. Huge companies, lots of data, and we're talking about people that no longer worked as well as current employees, and that cost CAMICO nearly, this is before we had cyber, the cyber CPA, just in notification costs alone, almost $1 million. So this is the kind of expense that you're looking at. Now, granted, you can scale that down for a smaller business, but still, it's an enormous burden on the small business, and this was a small, not a huge CPA firm. So without that coverage, and by the way, that's why it's now excluded from the professional liability, and we've now let NAS take over.
And that's interesting because this is actually the coverage component that we're seeing a lot that's triggered, and it's also the most expensive coverage component. And I want to spend some time on this section because it is very important. So I'm going to bring up an example similar to what Randy was talking about, where a CPA firm moved offices and they lost equipment, including laptops, computers, printers. And in one of the laptops, it included 36,000 of their customers' information. So it had Social Security information. So let's break this down. When we receive these types of claims notification of a breach of laptop stolen, the first thing we're going to do is hire a legal counsel. Lawyers are not cheap. So there's a huge expense as far as that's concerned. So what they'll do is research all the applicable laws to make sure that the insured is compliant in regards to federal as well as state laws. And then the next thing we need to do is to hire an IT forensics. They're going to determine what data was stolen, how was it stolen. In this case, it was pretty obvious, but sometimes through hacking, it's not always obvious. They're also going to determine how they can prevent a similar incident from happening again. So that could be, IT forensics are very costly as well. And then there could be requirements to notify these 36,000 customers that were breached. So a notification letter goes out to these 36,000 customers. apologizing for the breach, letting them know how it happened, what information would happen, and what to do about it. And obviously, with our coverage, most policies now, they provide free credit monitoring. So unfortunately, though, when these customers, let's say, not even 36,000 clients, for a small company, let's say 3,000 clients are notified about this breach, you can expect an influx of those calls calling your office. So if you only have 5 CSRs or 5 employees, they're going to be inundated with calls. So we can also put a call center together to handle the calls that comes in, because they're going to ask what information was stolen, what's my next steps. So those are all covered under this coverage component, and that's why it's very expensive. So they ask, how much is the data breach? Just a data breach alone on this single coverage component, we estimate about $10 per record. So, and that doesn't include fines and penalties imposed by the federal or state government. That doesn't include third-party lawsuits that may come from your customers or any other third parties. Another coverage component that's included on the cyber policy that you would see is the network asset protection, which provides coverage to recover any lost or damaged data. Some policies also broadens this to provide business interruption coverages, such as losses because they need to hire some people to input all the data back into their systems. There's also cyber extortion claims, which we've covered throughout the day today, which includes cyber ransomware. We started seeing ransomware in 2013, and we're seeing it quite a bit. And what's happening is, if you're not familiar with how ransomware works, so you probably are now because of all the presentations this morning, is obviously they, encrypt those files so you can't access it until you pay the ransom. What we're finding is about 50% of the files that we're encrypting or decrypting, we're finding that some of those files are damaged. So obviously there's going to be extortion because the policy pays the extortion monies that they're asking for, as far as ransom monies that they're asking for, but there's also possible IT forensics that we'll need to hire to find out how it was damaged and to fix the damaged files. So that would also hit the network asset protection of the policy. There's also cyber terrorism. So it protects any provides coverage for any business interruption loss. And we've seen this with abortion clinics, where hackers stop their business because they are absolutely against abortions. So it's usually ideological in reason, and as far as their motivation, it could be political or it could be religious. And we've seen it with religious because we have churches that we insure as well. Cybercrime, which the FBI agent definitely covered in a lot of detail, is we're seeing a lot of this. So this includes social engineering. So this is covered under most cyber policies now. So what it does cover is the financial loss. So for instance, there's financial loss because a CEO was basically impersonated to ask their accounting department to wire funds to another account. So that lost money of, let's say, $100,000 that they transferred, that would be covered under the policy. Now, with cybercrime, it's typically sublimited. And what I mean by that is, if you buy a cyber policy for $1 million, the cybercrime or social engineering coverage usually has a less coverage, which is usually about 10% of the limit of $100,000 coverage. And the reason being is because, as you can see, it could be very costly. And that's why we want to be able to offer some coverage, but obviously we limit the amount of coverage that's there. Under the cybercrime, some companies also provide coverage for telephone fraud, because a criminal can access your phone systems and use it to make long-distance calls or outgoing calls. So that's also covered on the policy, as well as phishing fraud.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So are you seeing some maturity in the cyber insurance area? I have indicated to many of my policyholders that it's kind of a wild, wild west in the cyber insurance world as well, just like we were talking about earlier with just cyber in general. So is that maturing? Are you seeing things that you can focus on, or is that also kind of a moving target based on what's happening in the cyber world?
That's a great question. We've been underwriting cyber for almost 20 years. And when we started, there were only 4 coverage components. Now we're looking at about 9 coverage components, or maybe even 10 now. We're looking at changing our policy forms again. We're constantly broadening coverage because of new cyber attacks that we're seeing. It has not matured. In the beginning, there's also first-party coverages that we're seeing. Now we're seeing third-party coverages. So these claims are also lasting longer because there's a quick first party of let's fix the system, restore the data, but then there's a long range of third-party claims that, the customers could file a claim against the company. Under cyber policy, it also provides coverage for brand guard, which is lost revenues because of maybe of an adverse, media report because of a cyber attack. So, for instance, that's really important with accountants because if there is something that's out there because as an accountant's information was breached and it was made to the media, they could definitely lose their current customers as well as potential customers. So that could affect their revenues. There's also third-party coverage. And the first one here is the multimedia liability coverage. And this provides coverage for copyright or trademark infringement. And it covers both online as well as offline. And when you think of cyber insurance, you think computers, right? Internet, computers, maybe cell phones. But the policies, or most policies, also cover paper. So your magazine subscriptions that you send out to your customers, if there's any types of pictures that you're using there, that could there's infringement that could be, or trademark or patent infringement that could be covered under policy. There's also security and privacy liability coverage, where as a company, you have the responsibility to secure your customers' information. So what happens there is if you don't protect it, the third-party customer can file a claim or a lawsuit against you for not securing their information. There's also the privacy regulatory defense and penalties coverage. An example with this is UCLA, where a few years ago, some of the employees stole patient information, Britney Spears, Maria Shriver, and the HIPAA, they were imposed with HIPAA fines and penalties of about $865,000. And they also had, were also required to train their employees and have, things that they had to do in order to be compliant with HIPAA. There's PCI DSS assessment coverage.
And that
Sure.
that's payment card industry, and DSS means what?
It's a mouthful.
Payment card industry. So
Yeah.
if you're collecting data, and this is true, more often with CPAs, we're representing clients that collect this kind of data, but it's payment card data, or they have retail stores, you need to be able to comply with that, and if there's a breach, you're going to have a problem. So it may not just be, certainly not just CPAs, it would be their clients, those of you in the audience.
Yeah. So it's DSS is data security security standards.
Yes,
so
that's
what
right.
the PCI DSS is basically any merchants that wants to use credit cards, they have to comply with the PCI DSS Council. And the council is basically created by 5 major credit cards. It's Amex, Discover, Visa, JCB Bank, and I'm forgetting one. And basically, they came up with rules and that merchants must abide by and to be in compliant to use credit cards to transact business. And what happens is if these merchants or companies are not compliant with their PCI DSS security standards, then they can impose fines and penalties on the merchant. So obviously, to the point that they could even tell them you can't use our credit cards anymore. And that could definitely hurt a business. Because who's writing checks nowadays? You know, I write a check to my gardener. That's probably about the only reason why I write checks nowadays. So here's an example of a third-party claim. We see this quite often, where there's an error of an accountant's office where they sent the tax return to a client who they thought was a client. They didn't realize it until the client followed up on that tax information, and then they found out that the tax information was sent to the wrong customer or wrong person. So that client filed a lawsuit against the company.
And that can also look like you send something to a client that's confidential, any client, any customer. We've had instances where the report is that because we know people chase these envelopes down from FedEx and then they pull them out of the mail because they're delivered without a signature, which is probably never a good idea anyway, but nevertheless. So we see all sorts of variations of this type of thing, and then lawsuits that come in as a result of it.
Yeah, definitely. Let's cover the cyber trends that we're seeing, and we're seeing a ton of claims. The first one on the list is employees and social media. Obviously, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, they can disclose private information about our customers. We insure about 30% of the doctors in the U.S., so we're seeing a lot of before and after pictures. So what happens is, for instance, someone has a breast augmentation, and even if they agree to use their photos for, the websites or their marketing materials, what happens sometimes is, and these customers sometimes says, you know what, you can use the pictures, that's fine, as long as my face is not there, my name is not attached to it, that's fine. However, what happens is when these pictures are posted on a website, Google indexes it with the meta tags. So even if their picture is not seen, when they Google and search their names, their pictures could come up. So obviously, if they didn't want their pictures to be publicized in the first place, they could file a claim against the company. Or, what they do is sometimes if you take your mouse and drag it over the pictures, the name of the file could be on there and their names could be included. So we're seeing quite a bit of those. There's employee carelessness or negligence, just like we were saying that employees could send wrong emails to the wrong people. So, that's covered on a policy as well. There's ransomware or cryptolocker. With cryptolockers or ransomwares, what's happening is that they're asking for a little bit of amount of monies. Like, the WannaCry, they're only asking for $300. We've seen maybe a little bit larger amounts that they say, one Bitcoin now is $2,500. So, they'll say, just 2 Bitcoins. And the reason why they're asking for such low amounts is so they don't stay under the FBI radar. So that way they're not researched as far as who's sending these emails. There's also rogue employees. We had a really interesting claim where an IT manager was fired because of performance. Unfortunately, we went back to the company and said, you know what, I have information on the company, and I'm willing to release it unless I get my job back. And obviously, the company's like, no way are you getting your job back. And they retaliated and filed a claim against the employee, and now he's facing criminal charges. So it's interesting the kind of claims we're seeing. There's also, of course, phishing schemes. I mean, we personally have been attacked with a phishing scheme where an employee, and there was a fake email to our CFO asking to wire transfer some funds, and he saw our CEO on the, in the office and said, hey, do you want me to still, transfer that $50,000? And the CEO is like, no, I didn't ask for, to transfer any monies at all. So luckily we caught that, but a lot of companies are, processing those transactions.
And in our case, I received an email saying, because I'm a CPA, and I guess they assumed I worked in the finance department, which I don't. I work in the loss prevention department, saying that our CEO had asked me to make a transfer. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, it wouldn't happen, and second of all, that's not how it works in our company. So, again, it goes back to what Bob had said earlier and Agent Sohn had said, is that you need to look at the, just practical stuff. Does it look real? Does it smell right? Does it feel right? Because of the way CPAs operate, I get a lot of the Dropbox questions. I get a lot of them, and I get nothing. I get an email supposedly from my CPA and say, click on this. I don't do that. I call the CPA. I haven't heard from you, and if you're sending me something, I need to know what it's in reference to, and is this a valid, and I will tell you, 100% of the time, it's not been valid. So those kinds of things, just as he said, they get those email addresses and target you.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
Another type of breach that we're seeing, obviously, is lost or stolen laptops or devices. I saw recent statistics that there's about 12,000 laptops that's lost or stolen at airports across the U.S., which is a large amount of laptops on a weekly basis. So, that's definitely a concern, because obviously a lot of laptops, I know I hold a lot of personal information in my laptop, and unfortunately I am part of the statistics now. Our house was robbed just last month, and all our laptops, Kindle Fire, iPad was all stolen, along with all my jewelry. So I went to buy some quick jewelry. All jewelries, my son's piggy banks were all stolen. They just ransacked the house. But, luckily we, our laptops are encrypted, and so we were able to, protect that information. But now I thought, why do we even have 4 laptops? There's only 3 of us in the family. So we scaled it down to 3 laptops. So we're seeing those types of breaches as well.
Okay. So now we're going to talk. I'll let you have that.
Sure.
I'll take that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about. I can't see as well as she can. I have it written in very large letters, just as reminders. I think it's because you're a lot younger than I am, Melvin. So now we are going to talk. Oops, did I do something? I did something, didn't I?
Yeah.
That one? There we go. Got it. Mine's not so fancy. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about risk management considerations, and this is information that you've already heard today about the incident response team, the incident response plan. I'm going to go over it briefly, kind of get more. You got a real high level at the top of the trees kind of level. Maybe I'll get down here in the bushes level. We won't get down in the weeds because we just simply don't. How much time do we have left? Okay, all right, about 10 minutes, all right. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it because we have some other good claims things that we want to talk about. If you go to the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which is referred to as NIST, this is their photo that they have that talks about an incident and a response and the way you handle it. And that's basically how you develop your incident response team. I don't know if I'm preaching to the choir, and I'm sorry if I do that for any of you, but a security incident definition is any incident that results in an unauthorized access to data, applications, services, networks, and or devices by bypassing security mechanisms. In other words, they don't need any passwords to get in. So there's other things that are going on, and this is sort of kind of one of the things at Ariento I wanted to make sure that they got credit for, because I know what they do. So a security violation, on the other hand, is an internal breach by such as a rogue employee. They range in risk from very low to very highly critical. Obviously, losing 36,000 records is very highly critical. An example of a low incident was a CPA had a portal, and somehow or another they enabled their portal to be seen by everybody on the website, anybody who entered into their website and posted some documents on there for 2 different clients. It was only on there for 2 hours when they discovered the error. From what they can tell, nobody accessed it except the client, and it was the client who said, how come I have so-and-so's documents? I can see those as well as my own, and that's how they discovered it. So it came down. So that's a low security because it involved 2 clients and for a very short period of time and very unlikely that anybody accessed it versus the highly critical. So you need to have an incident response plan that's flexible enough in order to be able to handle any of those kind of incidents. So again, Bob had talked earlier about risk assessment. What do you need to protect? I think this is sort of preaching to the choir here. The slide itself is self-explanatory, states the obvious, but it's a good reminder of what you need to do. You need to internally, now I'm a CPA, so we're very big on internal controls. Internal controls, internal controls, internal controls. Like the signing of the checks that they talked about earlier, that is just an absolute given. So you want to restrict access. Not all applications and information should be accessible, even a small business, by everyone in the firm. And if you're going to do that, I had an audit professor when I was in school who said, if you're going to do that, then change their jobs around every 3 to 6 months so that there's no ability for that person to get in and do malicious acts. They all, you've got a small business, you have somebody perhaps goes on maternity leave, then they're all trained to do that job, but it's a good internal control. Ask yourself, what are the risks if Joe were to have this information? Does he need to have the access to perform his job? It's just good internal control. And also, not every workstation needs to be set up as an administrator. This is another way with vulnerabilities that people can get into your system. And I advise that, especially in small businesses, only have those open that you absolutely have your administrator have one area that they work in, one computer. They don't need to, not all the computers need to have access to it. Oops, I did it again, sorry. Sorry. So, again, it's expensive to do, but conducting a risk assessment in your office, at least yearly, start out initially with find out where everything is. One of the things I like and I think is important to do, and admittedly it's kind of expensive, is penetration testing. That's where we allow our security people to try to get into the system and figure out where those vulnerabilities are. And CAMICO actually conducted a pen test a couple years ago, and I got an email supposedly from HR, the VP of HR, who said, we just like you so much, basically, we're going to give you a Starbucks card. Okay, well, that's not how it works at CAMICO, and when we get those kinds of things, they're behavior-based. We want you to complete this survey. We want you to attend this meeting or this training, and then we'll give you something. So it didn't sound right to me. I thought, oh, this has got to be phony. So I deleted it, and I ran into the VP. Of course, it was a pen test. We had, at that time, about 100 employees, and we had 19 employees click on it. So that gives you an idea. 20% of our employees failed the test. So that kind of gives you some idea. It points out that risky end-user behavior. They look at your operating systems when they do a pen test. They look at your service and application flaws, improper configurations. Things can be changed so that you have those vulnerabilities locked up. So it's just, again, pen testing is just that process of attempting to gain access to your system with, and resources without any knowledge of the usernames, the passwords, and other normal means. In other words, a lot of times social engineering. Pen testing is related to, but not the same as vulnerability testing, and I have a tough time rolling that off my tongue, so sorry. And we don't call it V-testing, which would be helpful. It's not quite the same. It goes up to the level of a pen test, they don't penetrate the system. It is less expensive, and I know that if it's a cost problem for a smaller business, that maybe that's something you would consider. Not the best, but it's better than doing nothing. You get a report on a pen test, and that gives you some idea of what you need to do, and it will also give you an idea of what black hats, which are the bad guys, could do. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So after you identify what you protect, just like Bobby had that whole list of things. Oops, I did it again. Sorry, I got that trigger finger, you know. Again, he talked about two-factor authentication, so did Agent Son, and we're a firm believer in two-factor authentication. I tell CPAs all the time, because they're mobile. And if you have a mobile business, you really need to be operating with a two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Encryption is another absolutely essential technology. If you don't understand how it works, you need to get with your security guy. You can talk to IT people, and as I was telling Melvin last night, I said, when you talk to an IT or security person, now security people I think try to make the handshake and talk your language. IT people, you have to learn to speak IT. They will not learn to speak your language. So that's the only way you're going to understand. You need to go back to NIST. There's a lot of great information on that website that can help educate you and help educate you to ask the right questions and understand what it is you need to do. But encryption is just absolutely essential, and people don't think about this, but it's really essential for phones. We are seeing a lot of things happening through mobile devices and phones. You're getting those things, those links, I'm sure, in texts, right, everybody? I've certainly gotten a few. So you need to encrypt your phone. And again, it brings up that whole issue about LastPass or OnePass, and I'm not sure if you're keeping that on your phone now when people can get into your phone, if that's such a good idea. I used to think it was good. The most cost-effective for you is to focus on your crown jewels and prioritize them. What needs the most protection, and then prioritize them and use that as your way of picking information, policies, procedures, and software products to be able to protect your business. Let's talk about the incident response team just quickly. Again, it is a framework and guidance, so Bob mentioned it briefly, but the response plan is a framework and guidance for managing and responding to that information security incidents. It's an organized approach for you to handle it. In other words, he said you call your attorney first. Well, he had exactly the same list in the same order that I had, except at the bottom of my list it has call your cybersecurity insurance company, because they probably are going to have access to an attorney that can help you out immediately. So, and Bob is probably employed by some of those companies, I'm sure. If you want to establish your own security incident response plan, again, NIST has that, and if you guys have a pen and paper, I'll give you the tiny URL. It's http://tinyurl.com, and this is the important part, /OD, it's small, unless I tell you it's the capital letters, they're all small letters, OD5CG6X. Again, OD5CG6X. And that'll get you to the security incident response plan template that you can start modifying for your own firm, your own company. So what we do know, and another statistic, is that if you are doing your own internal monitoring, only about 8% of companies find that there's been a breach. If you are using an external company such as Ariento or some other type of firm, 92% of the time it's discovered, and it's discovered a lot sooner. The breaches are going on much longer, and that's a problem for you, because the longer there's leakage, the more information is getting out there, the larger your loss could be, and your clients and customers' loss. All right. Develop your incident response plan, or your team. Again, this goes back to what Bob had said, senior management, who may or may not act as a spokesperson. If you've never been in front of a camera, I'm sure you have, or spoken to a reporter, it can be very disconcerting and very unnerving if you're not prepared for it. So if you know you're not the kind of person that does well under pressure, you should not be the spokesperson for an incident. You should hire somebody, should be your attorney. It can be a public relations person if they're trained to do that. And probably one of the questions you said, well, why do I need a public relations person? Reputational damage is one of the most severe consequences of a security breach that becomes public. That's also the way you go under. It's not just those costs, it's those embedded costs by having your business drop off the face of the earth because people now no longer trust you. So you do need to have that public relations person. All of these individuals should be trained in advance. You should have the contracts in place in advance, and you need to know, when can they respond? Are they available 24/7? It's like CPAs work on the weekends during busy season. You all know that, right? That breach has happened and has happened Saturday night. Can I reach my person at Saturday night to take care of this problem? Because if you can't, that is probably not a good fit for the firm or your business. In any case, so as you see the external incident response team includes your cyber insurance carriers, and I would, if you have cyber insurance, they should be your first call. And then if they say, well, we're not going to appoint an attorney, if you've got somebody there, or a firm like Ariento who can come in and do the forensics is locally. Because we do have in CPAs in Colorado in the middle of nowhere, and so they may be able to get to somebody faster than, say, maybe NAS, because they have to look through their resources. So you may know somebody, and you may want to have that relationship established well in advance if you know you live in that area. I don't think it's a problem here in California. I mean, we have a lot of technology, but if you go somewhere else or you have a business that's elsewhere, 2 different places, and one of them's out in the middle of nowhere, that's something to consider. Okay. All right, I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time because I want to give us some time for questions, if people have questions, and I'm sure they will on insurance products. So let's just move on to claims examples. And should we just take questions now before we move on? Because we can, yeah, all right. Anybody have questions on coverage or any other kinds of questions? All right. Well, okay, thanks.
I'm on the board with a very large nonprofit. We have a
So-
membership, and it's a somewhat different environment from the nonprofit industry.
Yes, we have. We've definitely seen a lot of, because we insure all types of classes. Nonprofit organizations such as, religious companies, Catholic, we have a huge list of Catholic churches. We have like Salvation Army types of charity companies that we insure, and there's definitely cyber breaches concerning them. So we've seen it all.
So, from my opinion, because I work with CPAs who work with lots of nonprofits, nonprofits are notorious, that's the word we use in our department, for poor internal controls. So not only do they need to have good internal controls, or the products in place, but they need to have the good internal controls of the people. I know that Bob had said, he called it the human factor. I always call it the people factor. People are people. So those 19 employees of CAMICO that clicked on the link, they need training of the employees is absolutely essential in this area, and constant reminders, and no punishment if something if they've clicked on something and done something untoward. They need to have the confidence that they can go in and not lose their job. Now, if they keep doing it, that's a different story. If they've been flipping around in other sites that they shouldn't be on, out shopping on the internet, in the church, and going to sites that are really kind of not good. So that's a problem. So training is absolutely, no matter what size business you are, training is essential for the employees to try to help them recognize and stay ahead of some of these dangers that we have that are out there, and the sophistication.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
can we help anybody else? Well, all right. Thank you for having us.